let's do that. So thanks everyone for coming out. I'm sure a few more folks will join in, and we're excited to share this recording out to everyone else after. My name's Aashni, and I'll let Sophie go ahead and introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Sophie Wyne. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AriGlad.
And maybe just give a quick intro on what it is that AriGlad does.
Yeah, so totally. So we offer a solution that allows employees to communicate with their managers and HR managers anonymously, either over Slack or in our portal. And so we really work with HR ops and people ops to drive trust and transparency and effectively putting their values to work internally.
Love it. I'm Aashni, and if we haven't had a chance to meet yet, I'm building Hype Docs. Hype Docs is a tool that lets you track all of your personal achievements and use it as a way to beat imposter syndrome. And in a workplace setting, it has the ability to effectively work as a bottoms-up approach, giving employees the ability to take back control of their personal or career narrative and actually earn the work or earn the recognition for work that they've already done. So why don't we kick things off, Sophie, with maybe you sharing a little bit more about the inspiration for AriGlad, because I know you and I have talked about it a few times in the past, and I've told you this many times. If I had AriGlad at companies I've worked at the past, I'd probably still be working there instead of leaving. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So the story of kind of the inspiration for AriGlad originally was I actually worked at a startup right out of university that kind of inspired it. It was a, let's say, culturally challenged workplace. At face value, it was funny because at face value, it was the dream company for a 22-year-old newly graduated person. And, you know, there were dogs running around. It was a tech startup. So there was beer pong, beer fridge, even beanbag chairs. But after a couple of weeks, I realized that there were kind of fractures and cultural issues that were kind of stirring up into the background. And so it escalated to the point where my entire team quit at the same time. And so that was about 30% of the company at that point. And I was super lucky, you know, we moved on to different, but I mean, companies with great culture, but that experience definitely stayed with me. And even in my new work environment, when I was speaking with my new coworkers or people that had recently joined, it was the same story over and over of I didn't get along with my manager. I didn't agree with some of the things that were happening at the company, cultural misunderstandings. And so I kind of just saw that there was this opportunity, whether it was a fractured workplace, whether it was an amazing culturally workplace, enterprise, startup, the same patterns exist everywhere. And so we really just aimed at focusing on how can we ensure that employees feel comfortable reaching out to their manager, to their support system internally about anything. And that can be for, you know, where to find your infertility benefits if you're struggling with that, or if you're having weird interactions with your boss and he's making you feel uncomfortable. These are situations where if you're not a open person, if you're a little bit more private, it's hard to kind of convince yourself to do that. And so we really want to make that step a little bit easier.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate that. It's something that one of my first companies out of university, similar story, really bad work culture, work environment, even though they're a well-known, highly respected company in the industry. And one of my largest frustrations, and I think the sort of turning point and reason that I ended up leaving the company, was because while I was facing a lot of mental abuse from my manager, when I went to get access to resources or when I went to get support, I didn't know where to turn and I didn't know how to get that help I needed. And when I did reach out to HR, the response I got from HR was less than ideal, with them sort of suggesting the exact response I got is, "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" And that's not something that I hope anyone wants to experience. And so why don't I take this as an opportunity to share a little bit more about Hype Docs, and also just let the folks on the call know, if you have any questions for us, feel free to ask them. We are going to have a Q&A session after this, but we will talk a little bit about where we see the employee satisfaction in the office or workplace today, since we're not quite at offices, and what we see the trend is happening in the future. So very quickly, after that initial company that I worked at, I ended up going to another company, and it was a night and day type experience in terms of the work culture and the opportunities that I had. And one of the first things that that my manager did when I joined the company, without knowing any of my background, was passing on this idea of creating a hype doc, a living list of my achievements. And it was just a Google Doc that I started off with. But I really loved the idea of it. I really loved the idea of like being able to track all the things that I'm working on that I'm really proud of, and saw so many applications for how it could work, whether I was writing self-evaluations or working on a resume in the future, or just, if I needed my own little mental boost for my, in the workday, especially if I'm tackling some really big projects. And I then saw ways to make that even more powerful by creating accountability groups around it. So I got together with some of the other women in my office, and we would meet once a week, update our hype docs together, but create that sort of safe circle where we could share what we're working on and also bring up any issues that we were facing. And because we were all in this, circle of trust, we started understanding and identifying how to really make the most out of the opportunities we had, and also how to lean on each other to get the promotions that we've deserved. And it was an incredible opportunity. And eventually, once I moved away and started working on my own things, I missed that aspect of hype docs, and so that's kind of how the idea of hype docs started. And lots of different things coming up for it in the future around goal setting and public pages, almost as a alternate way for you to track your own achievements. So I'm going to let Sophie, maybe you want to just describe what you're seeing from all the conversations you've had with HR folks around employee satisfaction today.
Totally. Yeah, it's definitely top of mind conversation, especially with everyone working from home. The dynamics are constantly changing between employers and their employees. And I think one of the conversations that has really been highlighted is how to make sure employees continue to be satisfied. How can we make sure that they still feel supported, that they are engaged, that they still enjoy their work beyond kind of their tasks, and feel enveloped and supported by their surrounding culture. I think one of the things that is really hurting the chances of an employee being satisfied and truly happy at their job is we're all kind of expected, and I'm not an employee, I'm an entrepreneur, but as an employee and when I'm working with HR, with employees, there's this expectation of putting on a happy face, not necessarily bringing up what's actually going on in your life, and having those kind of hollow questions of how are you doing today. No one's really expecting a true answer from that. And something that we've also discovered is kind of going a layer deeper even, but this kind of foundation kind of seeps into every part of your life, is employees often rely on their employers for many different aspects of support. So that could be through their health care, it could be through benefits, it could be asking for support during a troubling time. And again, like I was mentioning, if you are experiencing a health issue that's really sensitive, it's a very personal, private part of your life, but you are relying on your company to support you through that, you are not necessarily going to want to kind of break that barrier and talk to your HR manager or manager about something that's deeply personal. If you are experiencing something at work, even where you are feeling that is approaching a personal part of your life that it's crossing a line, again, you're probably not going to be super excited to bring that up with your manager, HR manager. And I think we're kind of expecting employees to have the same happy face whether or not they're going through personal struggles or whether they are truly happy. And by not having the ability to work through these problems with HR or with their managers, with their teams, it really breaks down trust. And it also is a missed opportunity. If an employee is going through a struggle and they feel supported and they feel that they have the ability to reach out and get the help that they needed at that time, or even just felt that they were, someone in their corner, that is really where you build extremely loyal employees. And those are the kind of employees that are going to stay. They're going to want to get promoted. They're going to want to continue adding value to your company. And so by having this unspoken expectation that everyone should generally be happy or act happy at all times, it's not going to be solved through a mental health webinar. It's going to be solved through, really implementing the values that you have as a company and making sure that they're upheld internally at all times. And so, yeah, I think, at the end of the day, one of the things that I'm definitely seeing in these conversations with HR is understanding, first of all, are employees actually happy? And if they're not, why? Because if you can't answer either of those questions, you're going to have absolutely no idea where to put your budget for employee wellness or what have you. And it's just definitely a conversation that needs to be talked about a little bit more as we're moving into this new way of working. So I would say, yeah, Aashni, that's kind of the main patterns that I've seen in my conversations with HR, but would love to understand kind of, yeah, how is Hype Talks kind of navigating that and making sure that employees feel satisfied?
Yeah, I think you touched on so many different things, and I'm trying to like casually take notes on the side so I can bring them back up. And I'll answer your question in a second, but I think there's one part you said around, these workshops or like a seminar where you go and watch a video isn't really sufficient enough anymore. Like that was maybe informative and helpful 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years ago. But today, it's either you've watched enough of these seminars, but no change is happening and you have no faith in it, or you've watched enough of these seminars and you still don't care, and it's because it's not making any sort of impact. Where what we need to do is essentially bake it into the culture of your company. And when you're a small startup, it's significantly easier to do that, because, or it's not significantly easier, but it's easier because you're implementing it at the birth of your company. Whereas if you're going to a big established company like Microsoft, Facebook, one of the greats, it's really hard to change that type of impact and an experience that you're facing at those companies. And I think, taking it back to the question you asked me about Hype Dogs, one of the big trends that we're noticing is a lot of employees just don't really know how to let their manager know the type of work that they're doing without feeling like they're continuously annoying or frustrating their manager with like useless updates. But then they also, the overcorrection of that is you only send the major updates and all these smaller things that you're working on get hidden. And that's becoming worse and worse as we're working from home and you don't have that sort of ability to mention or talk to the person next to you saying, oh, hey, this is a big issue or a big piece of work that I've been working on. And I think that's where one of the big ideas of Hype Docs and having it as a bottoms up list or bottoms up approach to sharing information with your, just admitting one more person into the call. I think that's where one of the really important aspects of actually sharing keeping track of what you're working on and your hypes and the things that you're proud of, and being able to share that with your manager in a way that you can essentially control that conversation makes a big impact. And almost, taking it back to that culture piece, if this is something that your manager recommends you do, if this is something that someone from higher up in the company is recommending, it has a much bigger impact, because it shows if they're able to do this and they're willing to do this, then I also have the ability to do that as well. And taking that time to say, okay, whether it's updating your Hype Doc and your achievement list, or looking at any other aspect of employee satisfaction around taking mental health days, or taking time off to be with your family, or to be with if you parental leave, maternity leave, or any of those sorts of things, unless the leadership are doing it or make you feel like you're able to, it's really hard to walk away from that. And it's becoming even harder with the whole work from home culture.
Yeah, there was actually one point there that you said that I just want to add on for a moment. I think I read a statistic the other day that something crazy like 80% of American workers don't take lunch. And there's this kind of culture around, if you take lunch, then you're not working as hard. If you're not working as hard, you're not going to be seen as valuable as your other employees. And one of the things that the article was saying that you can really combat this kind of culture with is for managers to just take lunch. If you're showing that you're logging off, you're taking a break, you're not available for those, 45 minutes, an hour, it's going to go so much farther than telling your, team to take lunch. And so I think, it's definitely what you were saying is super important and valuable, is nothing's going to change unless the leadership changes and if they exemplify the types of changes that they want to see.
Yeah, and someone just added a comment in here into the chat saying, I work for an organization that made a big deal about lunch. I completely agree with that. One of my favorite companies that I've ever worked at, we actually had large communal lunch tables, and the culture there was around noontime. And if you buy lunch, then you go ahead and bring it into the office and everyone goes and eats together. And usually there's groups of people going to different restaurants. So you've got 4 to 5 people that you're at a minimum sitting with. And it was a really great balance of, okay, let's talk shop, but also let's talk about the other things that are going on. And Sophie, one of the things you mentioned earlier is if I ask you, how are you doing? Or, what's up? I don't really expect you to dive into anything meaningful because I haven't really seen you in person. And you're a blob on the other side of the screen. Whereas if we're having these lunches, then I start getting to know a little bit more about you from a personal perspective. And so when I ask you what's up, you can tell me, oh yeah, my cat just did this amazing thing where he leapt off the windowsill onto the couch and it was the cutest thing ever. And it starts getting into those more personal things, which are extremely vital for our mental health. There's a question in the chat, so I'll read it out, and then for anyone who is watching the recording later, I'll read it out. So I'm curious how you'd go about creating a safe space for team members to share how they're feeling. Any tactical tips for managers? I've got a couple of tips, but Sophie, I'm going to let you go ahead with that, or start off anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think I will kind of take off what I was mentioning before about exemplifying the cultural changes that you want to see, be the change and all that. I think if you're a manager that wants to create a safe space for team members to actually share how they're feeling, is share how you're feeling. During the next team meeting, being able to say, hey, I'm actually not doing super great today. I had a horrible sleep. I am pretty groggy. Not really feeling this huge team meeting we have today, but I'm gonna, put my best foot forward. I think that's totally valid. And I think, yeah, it's really just being matter of fact of how you're feeling, what your headspace is that day. And I think especially for managers, it's so important to feel the flexibility to do that. And even for them to feel that they have seen the same behavior in their managers and those managers have seen it in their managers. And it's really this kind of chain of command and making sure that you're, really making sure that you're seeing kind of culture change that you want to see in your organization.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of great points. One thing that I think is really important is finding that balance between personal and private acknowledgments of feelings and emotions. And so, I want to encourage you to, not personal, sorry, publicly. I want to encourage you to, like, publicly, like in your team meetings, acknowledge events that are happening, like the unfortunate attacks on Asian and Pacific Islanders that have been happening in the last couple of weeks. That's something that, whether or not you realize that your employees are possibly and probably feeling in different ways, so acknowledge it in public and then offer anyone that opportunity to come and talk to you or share with you what they're feeling, either there or in a private conversation. And one thing that you really should be doing as a manager is setting up one-on-ones with anyone that reports to you, but also make it an option for anyone to come and set up that time on your calendar automatically, because those one-on-ones, if you keep them authentic and organic, are a great way for you to share information, but for your employees, for anyone that you're working with, to be able to come and pass that information back to you and start feeling or creating that bond and feeling like they're actually being heard, rather than doing it once every month. Or I've seen companies do it only once every 6 months, which boggles my mind. It's not a one-on-one at that point. So definitely trying to do that once every week or once every 2 weeks, just because Zoom fatigue is real. And then the last thing that I would really, really encourage and recommend you to do is, going back to that concept of baking it into your culture. At the start of every one of your meetings, share a hype. That's what we do with all of our hype, with the Hype Docs team, is at the start of any meeting, whether it's a one-on-one or it's a group meeting, I always say, okay, so share your hype, share your update. And if it's a one-on-one meeting, I'll also include a share a struggle. And I'll always include my own as well. And what I found is it helps everyone cheer each other on, learn a little bit more about each other. Of course, it's opt-in, so if you really don't want to share something, you don't have to, but it creates that encouraging environment that people are really looking for.
Yeah, I would also like to second that. I think the sharing a win and sharing a struggle is a great way to break the ice. And if everyone has to share a struggle, it really allows people to be a little bit more vulnerable, even if that means, sharing that, your cat's not feeling great today, or if you're, small little tidbits here and there. It just gives people the space to say something that is more meaningful to them from a challenging perspective. So I definitely think that's a great way to kind of set the tone.
Yeah, it also reminds you that okay, your teammate is doing an amazing, incredible job, and you're constantly comparing yourself to your teammate. And that imposter syndrome, especially for, the women or the underrepresented folks in the call, starts to really, really seep in. But the moment you start hearing about the struggles they're facing, you can associate it with, okay, I'm not alone. Like I'm struggling with the fact that I can't go out for walks as easily as I want to because of all of the COVID restrictions, or I'm struggling with the fact that I can't go and see my friends even though I've been living here for a year now. And hearing someone else say that can make me go, okay, I'm not alone. I can give myself, and I can give that space for me to feel those feelings, and it's totally okay. It's considered normal at this point as well. Cool. So if anyone has any other additional questions, please, you're welcome. Please feel free to drop them into the chat, or feel free to unmute and join the conversation as well. Sophie, maybe one thing I can ask you is since I've known you and since you've been working on Hourglad, you've made quite a few big pivots from a product perspective. And I know a lot of those have been driven from conversations you've been having with HR folks. What are some of the maybe key takeaways or that you've had from those conversations that have made you have that really big aha moment of like, okay, I could keep going down this line, but I think this set of features or like this offer that we're providing at the end of the day is going to be significantly more helpful?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think, we're in this funny position where our buyer and our user aren't always the same thing. So our buyer is, an organization, it's an HR department, and the user is the employee that's actually going to be, potentially leveraging the anonymous communication tool. And I think the pivots have really come from the fact that I'm never been an HR manager. This is not my industry. And so I've been learning kind of from scratch of what an HR manager does, how can we help them? Where do these gaps lie? And so from an employee perspective, we have understood that, especially through COVID, nobody wants to leave the infrastructure that they already have. So if they are using Slack all day, they live and breathe in Slack, it's unlikely that they're going to want to continuously, log out and log into something new. And so that was one of the reasons that we implemented our Slack integration. And from the HR manager side, which has definitely kind of shown the most dramatic pivots, has been that HR is not very supportive when it comes to handling employee concerns and challenges. And I think one of the biggest takeaways in general of that kind of space is it's pretty incredible that HR managers are responsible for finding the best dental benefits for employees and also for managing, sexual harassment claims and everything that kind of is in between. And so when we were creating, the ability for employees to offer up concerns or questions that they had anonymously to HR, it was really important to us that we were making sure that HR wasn't just capturing that information, but they were able to easily organize it, able to, capture the data that they needed, and also tag in the right people within their organization. So if they want legal advice, or if they want the ability for, their other HR coworker to hop in and take over some tasks, that they have the ability to do so. And so that was just a huge kind of focus point for us as well. And I think one of the questions that have kind of also come to mind, and I really wanted to explore with you, Aashni, is from the hype stock perspective, when you're really focusing on ensuring that employees are, hyping themselves up, you're often working with organizations that are seeing the need for that. So potentially employees that are not feeling very hyped about themselves and are not, are really struggling with imposter syndrome and such. How are you implementing those habits into their day-to-day? And how are you kind of helping employees understand, this is really beneficial for this reason, and B, you do have hypes, even if you don't think that you do?
Yeah, great set of questions. I'm going to answer the second part first around how do we sort of encourage people to think about hypes that they don't normally think about. And that's where the accountability groups, or what I like to call hype pods, comes into play. Because if I'm sharing my hypes or if I'm sharing my wins in a chat with other people, especially if it's in a work environment, then it gives me the ability to say, hey, I just wrote out, I'm a software developer, like that's where my experience comes from. So I can say, hey, I just wrote these 10 different PRs, where another software development friend could say, I just reviewed 10 PRs. And I would normally not have thought about adding that review piece in there, but it gives me the idea of like, okay, that's additional work that I did that I haven't really hyped myself over. And on a day where maybe I didn't get a code change out, the fact that I reviewed other people's code is still really important to my job. And so I really do encourage that that accountability group piece to it. As for building these habits, that's something that we're currently working on improving throughout the app with introducing some new gamification type strategies. We have what we call streaks, where you can actually track and see how many times you've been posting, but we're actually working on how to make this a daily app using notifications and reminders, and almost setting a calendar reminder for you, whether it's for yourself or for a group of people, to say, hey, this is your Hype Doc update time. One of the key things that we've been doing, and you know, every week we see many people clicking on the link from the email we send out, is quite literally sending an email saying, hey, remember that time you did X? And that X is from some of the stuff that you submitted in the past. Well, you're awesome for doing it. What have you done this week? And one of the other parts that we've been having, which has shown quite a lot of success as well, is including this component of a prompt where we prompt you with different types of questions. And a big part of the way we've structured that prompt piece is, I don't want you to just track your work wins. I want you to track all of your wins, because you at the end of the day are an individual person, and your personal and professional sides both encompass who you are as a person. And so when you're submitting these hypes, it should be a combination of, okay, I baked a cake, I also climbed Mount Everest, and I launched a product to a new market. And all three of those things are really, you know, it's a combination of big things and small things, and almost putting you into that mindset of, how do we go about doing this? And then I'll add one last one in very quickly. One of the other key things that we've included is this concept of setting a mission. And the setting a mission piece, I think, for me is really important. I've had this mission set as my email, or on my email and on my Twitter bio, which is, I'm on a mission to build a better tomorrow. And by constantly having that in places that I check regularly, it reminds me of, hey, this is something that is important to me, and I want to make sure decisions I'm making today help me towards my mission. And so we've included that into Hype Docs, where when you set up your account, you actually go ahead and create your mission and set your mission. And through that entire process, it actually gives you the ability to have that centered focus. We're working on a few more changes like that to help you. And one of the changes we're hoping to launch later this week or next week is a goal setting component, where you can go ahead and create goals and say, and this has actually been heavily requested from a lot of our users, which is, my goal is I want to get promoted in the next 6 months. So any of the hypes that I do that are associated to that, I can mark it and say, this is all related to this goal. Similarly, maybe I want to lose weight, or maybe I want to get healthier. Maybe I want to, finally, I'm trying to think of things that work in a COVID case. Maybe I just want to get out of my virtual bubble and talk on the phone with a friend, which I haven't done in a couple months. And those are the kind of things that we're introducing into this goal setting concept. Yeah. So Ty, Muncie, and anyone else who's still on the call, feel free to ask any questions. If not, we can definitely wrap up soon. But, we just got one more person joining in. Before we go ahead and do that, Sophie, I'd love to get your take on what you see as the future of HR's role in a world where we're not quite in an office setting anymore, but rather we're going to find some combination of being virtual and also potentially being back in the office as well.
Yeah, I think it's funny. One of the things that really stuck with me that someone mentioned a couple of months ago is HR during COVID is what the finance industry was during the 2008 crisis. And so, HR is really that facilitation of what is tomorrow going to look like from a culture perspective? From, are we going back to work? Are we going to be virtual now? And so I think one of the things that HR is really responsible for is the ability to understand what is the needs of employees. Or do employees want to go back to work? Are they happy working from home? Are they needing more support in, hyping themselves up or having a closer bond with their teammates? And so I think it's one of those things where, the general, payroll, all of that stuff is happening already. All of that is taken care of online. I think it's the cultural and team dynamic aspect that they need to really focus on. And so that's kind of where their role is going.
Yeah. And I feel like I've said this, yeah, I've definitely said this to you before. And I feel like the more and more I think about it, the more I really believe it is, yes, Arglad and Hype Docs to some extent are HR tech products, but I feel like at the core, we're really more culture products or culture tech products, because we're not just trying to make HR's lives easier. We're trying to really find ways to make the culture at a company significantly stronger and healthier. And that, I think, is what keeps me really, really excited in terms of what we're both working on and building in the future. Awesome. Well, I'll give folks another 30 seconds to ask any questions they have. If not, please, I'm going to drop the links to our websites in the chat. So I recommend and encourage you to go and check both of them out. For anyone who's not able to see the chat, Sophie runs a company called Araglad, and the website is araglad.com. And I am running a company called Hype Docs. I cannot type and talk at the same time. There we go. Hype Docs, and the website is hypedocs.co. So thank you so much for tuning in. Sophie, any last words before we end the call?
No, thank you so much, Aashni, for, facilitating this as well. And this has just been an amazing conversation. So thank you. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.